listening to lately for music?
I actually have stuck on "Getting Boring by the Sea" is a song by oh man, I'm blanking on it, of course, but my kids have been like hyper fixated on this song and a bunch of the alt rock that I had collected from the early 2000s.
Oh, really?
And it's let's see here, Blood Red Shoes is the group, and I've listened to a variety of their things. It's all from let's see here, what is the album? I'm getting I can't find the dang album that it's from, but I've listened to a variety from them. But a lot of the girl rock and whatnot that was from the mid 2000s, and both my
Right,
kids seem
right.
to really get a kick out of it. And I was, you know, since I kind of know where we're going with this to a certain degree, I'll say that it's just a lot more fun. You get a lot more variety in that alt rock than the I don't know, man. Everything in the past like 15 years, I feel like sounds so samey. I miss the early 2000s alt rock. That's probably high school nostalgia to a certain degree. But how about
Yeah, no, it's
yourself?
fair. And well, I've been on like this. I've been on kind of because last year I'd made quite a few discoveries, and they're like all over the place. One of them was George Clanton, who kind of came out of like the vaporwave scene. He actually does this really, really nice '90s kind of pseudo trip hop sound. Like it's just you know it when you hear it. It's
Hmm.
like, oh my god, that's so damn '90s. But it's not in like the plastic bubblegum kind of sense. It's this very laid back but very electronic sort of sound. And he had this track that came out, I think a year or two ago. I've Been Young. Yeah, it was actually 2023, and it's just oh my god, you just it the kind of music and the kind of production job that you just melt into. I was a lot of songs that I was listening to really fell into that because I had that. I had Foster the People last year came out with a new album, and one of the tracks off that, Chasing Low Vibrations, just I think I mentioned this last episode, but holy mother of God, that was a that just absolutely envelops you.
Hmm.
Um, so it's been a mix of that. It's been a mix of old favorites I'd been introduced and reintroduced to. Like I've actually, when I started keeping that journal of like all the art I've experienced, whether it's I've watched this movie, read this, read a chapter or two out of this book, or listened to this audio play or whatever. And a lot of it is like benders of like classic rock and 80s metal and stuff like that. But recently I've just kind of thrown open the gates, and it's been one day it is something like I go on like a drum and bass kick,
Hmm.
and just the absolutely insane break beat kind of music. And then on the next, I'll pull up something like what one guy, actually, JW Francis, I discovered because, oh dear god, someone, he made a song called John Take Me With You, and someone turned it into a animation about Garfield and his owner John, and you can look it up on YouTube. It's a beautifully done piece, but the song is like, it's really catchy. It's really nice. He has this really beautiful guitar tone, and he did an album last year. Jesus God, let me find that. Um, he did an album last year called Sunshine, and the opening track Orbit. Oh my God, the production on this thing is beautiful, beautiful indie like bedroom pop type stuff.
We were having a conversation the other night, the various absurd writing music that some people had found, and I will also occasionally pick I want just background music
Right, right.
to code to something that won't distract me or anything like that. And it's fairly easy to find some of these like sci-fi lo-fi, if you will, where they bump it up with a little bit more synth, or they
Yeah.
do this, that, or the other. White Bat Audio is like an example of, I would say, one of the good
Mm.
ones where they're going for royalty free. So it's a little bit generic sounding, but it at least gets the right vibe of things. But then you have a million imitators. And we were pointing out things like barbarian lo-fi and paleo lo-fi. And it's just regular lo-fi, but it has a picture of a caveman on the front of it, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, good.
The lowest effort thing that you can imagine is what's there, and it's like a dark swamp of just hackery all the way down.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I remember Akira the Don, the guy behind like Meaning Wave, was actually posting
Mm-hmm.
about how it's basically been proven that there's like a bunch of these streams that are now like fully done through like generative music, through like generative artificial intelligence models, and it's like, you know what? I'm not terribly surprised because the elements all are so simple and they all kind of coalesce in the same. Because I wrote lo-fi in high school, but my problem was me being, me being me, I couldn't help myself and I couldn't just let it be, chill study beats to relax to. No, I had to like go in for like the jazz fusion piano solos, and I had to go for like the really good deep bass licks. Actually, there's a I won't give away too much about what it is, but I've been roped into an interesting writing in the round project, where it's like a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
authors kicking a story from one guy to the next, which I look forward to getting involved in. But
That
one of
sounds
the
like fun.
things, yeah, and one of the things that I shared actually was one of those pieces from high school I had done, which is like this weird chip tune lo-fi. There's elements of like the trap hi-hat in there, but it's not like a trap beat because it doesn't really have that perfect sizzling that you get in the hi-hats where it's happening so fast, and like people call it the water sprinkler for a reason, and it's not quite like that.
Yeah.
And I remember going over well with the guys, and I'm thinking there's a level of melodic complexity in here. There's a level of harmonic complexity in here. You just don't hear in a lot of these streams. And not for nothing, I found a lot of really nice. It's such a fascinating that this is one of those trends that kind of came out during the 2010s. The whole kind of, I think one of the terms people use is hauntological, which I believe is kind of tied into sort of ideas, the ghosts of the past. I'm doing this completely off the top of my head, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say
But
your guess is as good as mine on this one.
yeah,
I,
I know. But well, the general umbrella, I guess you'd put it in more layman's terms, is the idea of more nostalgic feeling music. So kind of the
yes.
rise of like a synth wave or like a vapor wave,
Yeah.
where the elements of lo-fi, being, the vinyl static, they're not the mixes aren't as bright. There's heavy electric piano all over these damn things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's such an interesting trend that this is one of the ones that has kind of become almost sort of just a natural part of like the music ecosystem online. It's like throw a dart, hit a lo-fi anime girl. That's basically what it is
Yes.
nowadays.
Yes.
Or a lo-fi anime barbarian, as it were.
Well, the funny thing about the lo-fi anime barbarian is that he was in the exact same pose as the quintessential lo-fi anime girl, sitting there with like a bone
Right.
and a horn of mead, and so I was like, I appreciate the level of cynicism going on here.
It's also funny too about all these various theme lo-fi things, just because everyone has their own version of like study music. Like in my case, I cannot. Some genetic freaks can do this with music with lyrics. I could not, because if I get like a good lyrical song, I'm lost in that song. Like, there are songs that I will just get absolute like. Great example was like Michael Jackson's "Stranger in Moscow." I could not do any study work to that song because I just get lost in the atmosphere and the ambience, and the fact that one of the most metal lyrics in all of like music is in a Michael Jackson pop song, and it's the line, Stalin's tomb won't let me be. Like, that's just, that's mwah, mwah, poetry. But it's like, I cannot do study music with lyrics. It has to be like old jazz albums, like Miles Davis or Art Blakey. It has to be like production music. For those who don't know, there used to be Library House, and there technically still are, because technically YouTube Music, like, you know, there's like in the actual audio editing system on YouTube, you have access to tracks through YouTube. You have access to different, you know, royalty-free libraries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
People who actually designate their tracks to be part of the YouTube library system. But like back in the day, basically, there were all these different library houses like KPM, Bruton, DeWolf, Sonneton over in Germany. And like that's where my study music really comes from. And it's funny too, because a lot of that I discovered, ironically enough, through YouTube, through kind of surfing, you know, descending through the algorithms of all this rare groove stuff and finding all these different tracks. But it's like it's funny too how there's become kind of that market for that modern version of study music, and it's just everywhere in the way you've kind of described.
Yeah, and I also, so my go-to with things like this is usually Akira the Dawn with his Meaning Wave instrumentals, because if I can just listen to that, whatever. But the problem is that once again I start thinking about the lyrics, because I know the songs, and so it becomes a distraction almost. And so this goes towards this strange new media. I don't know. I feel like it's the big challenge of our age in some ways is figuring out media wise what we're going to do about the fact that everybody is consuming and at times also producing multiple types of media content all at the same time, which is just not how things used to be. It's given rise to a lot of, I guess, a lot of things working towards the lowest common denominator, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I remember talking about this because I recently wrote a little article over on Substack called "Pop Music is Dead, Long Live Pop." And it essentially, one of the things actually, because Alexander Helene, who I knew from, and I believe I pronounced his name right, who I initially knew on X, now he's kind of a denizen of the Substack network. He'd actually mentioned how there technically is still like a monoculture, but like you said, it is aiming towards that lowest common denominator. So it's kind of, you get to these very, not banal. I think some people jokingly call it like coworker music and stuff like that. You know, everyone listening to like Imagine Dragons and whatever.
Yeah.
But I do understand that too. But at the same time, it's also interesting because you have sort of this almost hand in hand ascent of never before has there been so much freedom of creativity in music. Like never before have we had such artistic freedom. Like, because all those guys I mentioned earlier, you know, your George Clinton, J.W. Francis, like all these different artists could not, I'll put it this way, if they existed in like the heyday of the record of the record industry, they were still there, but they'd be like super indie. They'd be on like 5 45-inch records, one cassette, and you'd have to go into the deepest jungles of Portland, Oregon to find them. Like they'd have gone totally obscure. And you see that, you know, if you go crate digging for any genre, like a lot of drum and bass, I know, is literally, if you didn't buy the 12-inch record, all you got is the YouTube rip. Or, you know, if you weren't there, you know, you weren't there. You know, but now, because not only do we have kind of access to not just the most music we've had access to in literally the history of man.
Yeah.
But never before have we had more freedom to create whatever the hell we want. Like pop music in like the mainstream industry, in the infrastructure that remains of the mainstream industry, the major record labels, stuff like that. Artists do have a level of creative freedom. Like people talk about, you know, oh, pop music's getting simpler or this, that, and the other thing. But at the same time, there's still an aesthetic variety there's a wide range of artists topping the charts, wide range of creative voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, take for example, I don't know that I could tell you a single thing that's been produced by any of those people. Maybe that's just old man going on here, but at the same time, I think that there's a lot of people who are just not plugged in at all. I think it's culture is also starting to get the pop culture is starting to get narrower and narrower in terms of its appeal to the younger. I think people age out of it faster. I remember amusing anecdote here, but one of my jobs, college jobs, was working at a carbon fiber factory. And there's a middle-aged, British guy who was one of the engineers who helped, press and mold and everything else, the carbon fiber, because this was for like race car bodies and plane bodies and things like that. And I would be in there, and in the morning, every single day, he would listen to the I forget what it's called. It's not top 40, but like the whatever the hot new songs were, and it was
technically, just to clarify this, there is a difference between Billboard Hot 100, which is charting singles and songs, versus like the top 40, which is kind of this. I guess is the more competitive of the two, I'd say. So I definitely understand the difference in format.
Well, there were not 40 songs. What I want to convey here is that there were not 40 songs played on this radio station. Okay, there were like 8 songs. Okay.
Oh my god.
Yes. Okay. This was like the morning drive of whatever, and I remember distinctly old Shakira and Hips Don't Lie will forever be burned into my brain because that was the number one single of that time. Okay, so we're working in this like 400 degree oven, or right next to this 400 degree press with sheets of highly toxic carbon fiber, and this British guy is just belting out every word of every single thing because on the weekends he wanted to be a DJ and he would go DJ for places. And, I was like, well, like I'm kind of curious. I mean, this guy did not look at all like a DJ. He looked precisely like you would expect a middle-aged British engineer to look. And I was like, where is it? And he would play all sorts of things, and everybody generally was wanting, sometimes people would have requests, but almost universally what he told me was, it doesn't matter if it's a wedding or, birthday party or whatever. People are always wanting to hear the latest, whatever the pop music is. And, whether out in a nightclub or out, basically. And I just think that, maybe that's still the case for DJs to a certain degree. They feel the need to stay up to speed on things. But I think broadly, there's just a lot. People are leaving the pop culture pool, if you will, like what's new, much faster. You know what I mean? Like I feel like even 10 years ago, I barely knew what was really going on in terms of the pop music. And by at that point in time, I would have still been in my 20s. And so I think that as things have gotten more, I don't know if generic is exactly the right word, but I feel like it's much more inclined to find your niches and just kind of stay there. Maybe current, like the moment you turn 13 or what, right whenever you're in that most influential age, you're still very much molded by whatever the pop music is coming out. But that time where it's actually being influential is getting shorter and shorter, essentially.
I can see that. Because I know my story is different in that mine was sort of active rebellion, but not into the hipster direction, but rather because I grew up with our local pop station, I believe was a Kiss FM. One 5.5 on the dial, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
And so the combination of that on car rides and like the last vestiges of MTV still playing music videos, like back when you had the channels,
Yeah.
like let's throw it right back to like an '08 or an '09, where you were still like Poker Face was coming in big. Uh it's funny you mentioned Kesha because was it around 2010 on the button was
Hmm.
TikTok was when that kind of came around. Uh, and I remember those videos being on TV. And so you had kind of that, classic mass market, pipeline combined with the other classic mass market pipeline radio. And that's how a lot of people still discover, like people exaggerate the death of formats. Like, for example, when people keep saying physical media is dead, quote unquote, what they essentially mean is that, broadly speaking, more people tend to use streaming services than buy DVDs or Blu-rays, or, if you want to be an insane man like me, collect VHS tapes for that specific niche of I only watch 80s action in this format. But more broadly speaking, DVDs are still being made. Like you can still buy like a DVD set of like Yellowstone. You can still buy DVD sets of new shows. You can still buy DVD sets of new films. Similarly, people forget that radio still plays a big role in how a lot of people are listening to music because whether it's like Sirius XM or
Hmm.
whether it's just plain old AM FM, people still like one of the things people totally don't realize is just how radio driven the country music market is. Like there are
Yeah.
always artists doing spots on radio. There are always these big pushes. There's always, and more interestingly, because of the nature of the country music format, hot new singles are always in rotation with favorites from 5, 10, 15, 20 years back. Like I think the only large cutoff people have is like 90s country now. So that's
Yeah.
like a 30-year window of music being, shared in like a non-classic format. Almost like the only other format I think does that is like adult contemporary. And even then they'll go back a little further into like 80s and 70s for some of the old soft rock favorites, like Christopher Cross, Sailing, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's like these old vestiges are still there, but they're also now competing against the internet and competing
Hmm.
against social media and competing against the independent platforms like a Bandcamp and a Spotify and even the YouTube. For all the shit we give, the algorithm
Hmm.
TM registered sound mark.
Yeah.
A lot of people discover music through that. And I mean, we just proved the point earlier, me with library music, you with barbarian lo-fi beats to slaughter orcs to or whatever. Sorry, John. Sorry, John A. Douglas.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, so it's like that is a new metric of discovery. And also, if you're if you're interested too, there are also the fact that there are now like prominent music reviewers like on YouTube. Like everyone will give him shit 5 ways to Sunday, but the needle drop. Anthony Fantano. That's where a lot of people
Hmm.
have probably gotten introduced to a lot of music. I remember actually going into college, there was this great album from an artist, Against All Logic. It's electronic project, and there's this song Penny that had these beautiful glassy synths and this really hypnotic beat to it that I've been listening to for like the better part of a half decade now. Like I love that song to bits. It's a
Mm.
beautiful, and I discovered it through Fantano. And similarly, it's like when I was going through my, all I want to do is listen to classic rock and metal and whatever. Razorfist, the Rageaholic, with his Metal Mythos series, that was a big learning curve. I would not have discovered these bands without his mythos. And then you get other guys like Mike the Snare, which if I didn't mention him last time, I'll mention him this time, who has a series called Deep Discog Dives, which is similar to the Mythos, but it's his own approach to presentation. It's his own approach to format. It's his own sense of humor, and more importantly, it's his own sense of taste, because he has such a wide array of artists. He covers everything from Prince to Talking Heads to the Nationals to Kate Bush. It's just a wonderful array of artists. And to be honest, he's actually come in handy for my own retrospectives recently on like kind of like pop music coming in from the 90s into the 2010s, because he's done decade retrospectives for, I believe, each 1990s, 2000s, 2010s. And also, just to give me an absolute, Vietnam flashback, I found out that he actually did an episode on Maroon 5. So I'm like, all right, brace myself. I haven't heard these hooks in fucking 10 years.
Yeah, I have a theory also, and I don't know if I doubt that I brought it up in the previous episode. Have suggested that I feel like music, if you want to look for where things are going for other mediums, I think that music is a good place to kind of look at and get some ideas of what might happen and how things can play out, because I really feel like music was the first medium to get I would say to smash the traditional publishing system, just due to the rise of Napster. Mind you, it had a bunch of problems that other mediums have not had as much, but I feel like music has been the front runner in terms of having a indie scene spring up, having, going through kind of a financial apocalypse, and then still struggling with the giants that are there, but people also kind of sorting themselves into these little subgroups and sub communities. Do you think that's a fair idea, as far as the progression of how music has changed as an industry since the what is it, like 99, I guess, is when Napster was up?
I'd say that's pretty fair, because that was the thing I was also thinking too, because Napster, even though obviously we recommend you support your artist in as formal a manner as possible, please fork over legal tender at your nearest dispensary of fine musical product. Anyway, the disclaimer that we do not certainly endorse the use of torrenting in any possible context. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, shake camera.
Yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, I do think, because Napster kind of solved the distribution problem, and especially the distribution problem that would later, save most music from obscurity. Because the reason why I mentioned library music is not just because, I'm not like other podcasters. It's because literally I would not have discovered that without the completely decentralized distribution systems we now have, that were essentially pioneered by a Napster and by LimeWire and by the whole piracy thing. And because music was kind of the first thing to really, be hit by that, because the file sizes were smaller, naturally it takes a hell of a lot longer to actually get a movie downloaded. It also takes a hell of a lot longer to download a car, as the old PSAs would say.
Yeah.
You would download a car. Actually, I would, and I will.
I wish it was legal.
Yeah, exactly.
To
But
just build my own. I just want to 3D print my own car. Anyway.
Literally, fucking literally. No, but basically, because of the decentralization of music that early on, and then you have the rise of stuff like a MySpace, where you have kind of the personalization of your site with playable music in the background. Music essentially always was allowed to be on the cutting edge of a lot of what was happening on the internet. And you get these, campaigns happening online more and more. You have people who will literally just, like, if you want to go back into the pop world for a bit, I believe it was Beyonce self-titled that she just dropped one Friday in 2013 with like no publicity. Like there was She had an entire, like, I think it was like she had done it up as a visual album. So basically every song had a video,
Yeah.
everything entirely in secret, and then just boom, one day drops it. Everyone goes fucking ballistic, and the fact that you can now do that because of the instantaneousness of digital downloads and of digital storefronts like in iTunes or now Amazon Music and what have you. Um, and of course, with the indie space, places like Bandcamp and SoundCloud, because of course, everyone makes the jokes about the SoundCloud rappers, but that is genuinely one of the great breakthroughs for a lot of people in terms of distribution. They started putting out mixtapes on SoundCloud. And then all of a
Yep.
sudden, more and more people listen, and they get it's more and more popular. And all of a sudden, oh boy, here comes the label knocking down the door, handing, putting a contract in my fucking hand. Bada bing, bada boom. Now I'm off, and now I'm doing tours, and it's a legitimate way to start a career now. In certain respects. So
Yes.
I do think music has always been on the cutting edge of that for sure, and I think it's also the reason why I will go to my grave saying this. Music in the entire history of its existence has never been in any real threat. Like, yes, if you wanted to go back into the world of like Baroque, classical, Renaissance period music, yes, you could say, things were being, kind of shackled to just writing for, religious service and ceremony and everything like that. But that's not really it, because music was still being done for other things around that time. There were still folk tunes. There were still, songs being sung on the street. Basically, there's never been really any point where music's been like dead on its deathbed, dying, no matter what panic attacks, like a Rick Beato has or something like that. I think the decentralization has saved it almost completely on an artistic level. People can now do whatever they want, and provided they work the wire, they work the wire act of music promotion,
Mm-hmm.
they can find an audience. An audience is there. And you see
Yes.
it in the niche, in kind of the nicheification of genre and the idea of the micro genre, where it's like, yes, people now know what vaporwave is, but now you
Well,
get deeper into it, and you get like, elements of trap get involved, or you get people who have specific versions, like this is late night lo-fi, this is, oh my god,
well, I
also
think
the
I
issue
think
too is that because
also
there's so much
what
you
I
get
would
lost.
say, yeah, what I would say also is that I mean, I keep coming back to Akira at the Dawn, but I think he's an excellent example of all this because he basically created a very very specific brand, and that had a very unique twist and was able to collaborate with successful people that have their own audiences and provide something of value to them while staying true to a kind of vision that he had for what he wanted to be doing. And I think that's really, I'm obviously a fan of his, but I will say I think that he's somebody that can be looked at as a way for, how can I be successful in the world of indie? He hammered it out, and it's taken him years, but now there's really no other brand like it, and anybody who tries to imitate it is easily identified as, oh well, this is a knockoff of Meaning Wave, and it's just not as good. It's not him. And I think that's kind of the ultimate evolution I see of where most media is headed, is the creator driven branding, where you have a vision and an idea and you're able to pursue that. And so I think, I think that yes, there's obviously obstacles to different mediums and whatnot, but as we're moving into the future, I think that broadly speaking, that if you want ideas on how to make it, I always think that music, and looking at the musicians that have either carved out niches or bucked the mainstream production method to get into the mainstream, I think it's always worth checking out what they've been up to.
No, absolutely. And I think I can only really say creative driven for the time being is going to be, it has to be the future, because the other thing too is that it's like there is there is so little left to work with from out of the mainstream. Like, one of the things I kind of been mulling over is the fact that we've kind of run out of things to be nostalgic for. Like,
Hmm.
obviously, we don't know what like Gen A or the younger side of Gen Z, my generation is going to be like hyper nostalgic for. You have certain things that have been cropping up, like a Fruta Guerrero, which, for those who don't know, is essentially this kind of era in UI, in user interface design, focused on things like skeuomorphism, very cool color palettes, focused on lots of greens and blues, and this idea of kind of nature and tech and harmony on this. It's a very utopian vision, and it's kind of become associated by just the era itself with the light airiness of music, such
Yeah.
such such as the kind of stuff that was being made for like the Wii, like the kind of menu themes that are very light, very with the gentle kind of like, not bells. That's not the way I'd put it, but you know what I mean. Very light, airy, atmospheric approach to electronica with little elements of bossa and
Hmm.
other. It feels light. It feels airy. It feels like the future.
Yeah.
But even then, the issue there is that it is so abstracted and it's kind of reconstituted from a wide array of elements, not deliberately done, in concert. Windows did not develop the Arrow user interface because they wanted to create this little futurism movement. They did it to kind of ease people into personal desktop computers, bring those into the home, to kind of
Hmm.
get away from a lot of the blockier designs of the 90s. People, this image of kind of nature in nature and tech and harmony, in many cases, like in like building design, like an office design, people kind of associate it less with oh, this is a really fascinating vision of the future, and more, oh, so that's why they put those plastic office plants in my cubicle,
Yeah.
or in the main hall, or so that's why they had that glassy blue mural when I walked into my shit kicker 9 to 5 office job. And
Hmm.
that's the thing too. It's because it's such a narrow piece of ephemera that, I mean, if you knew it when you felt it. Like, the story I always tell people is how I know Fruta Guerrero was a thing, was that when I was literally like 5 or 6, I remember having this dream where the back behind my house in New York, we have a hayfield. Farmer would come in, take away all the hay, use it to feed his cows. Perfect system, because we didn't need the hay for shit. We just had a couple of chickens in a coop. That was it.
Hmm.
But I remember when I was 5 or 6, that whole field was gone, and in its place was this deep, sprawling valley with this rich green. Like, it almost hurts if I was to it would almost hurt if I was to watch that in real life. I was to see that in real life. But
Hmm.
this very vivid green and this very vivid blue sky, and at the center of it was this like giant football stadium,
Hmm.
decked to the nines in elements and logos and ephemera from Windows XP. I'm not shitting you. There was a blimp with the Windows Media Player logo on it. There was a blimp with the Windows Media Player logo on it. I swear to God. The little XP Microsoft, like, that was there too. It was all there. I can see it clear as day. That I understand Fruta Guerrero on that on that level, but at the same time, it's one of those things that really could only have kind of come from kind of this land of dreams and this land of the era of kids playing on the Wii, playing like Wii Sports, having this incredibly inviting idea of technology in the home. Because everyone loves the Windows Bliss background, the beautiful blue sky, the wonderful green
Hmm.
fields. Everyone loves that shit. Everyone loves that style of UI. And the adjacent styles, the style of like the Xbox, the original Xbox's UI.
Yes.
Very, very just magnetic kind of design. It's very eye-catching. It's very engaging. Um, Especially in the day of like flat design and the day of, everything's been minimized and utilitized to the point where nothing has any character anymore. For God's sakes, the software we're recording this on, for those who don't know, we're recording this off Streamlabs. Plain white background beyond the video file, plain buttons, plain everything. I look down at like the taskbar on like my Windows 10 because I run Windows 10 off of Lenovo. Plain taskbar, flat logos. It's all blah. But that's such an esoteric piece of nostalgia. There's no real cultural iconography surrounding it in the same way the 80s had, like your Back to the Futures, and you had kind of the amalgam of like nerd culture that came in with like a Ready Player One or stuff like that. The thing of like a Fruity Guerrero is so very specifically tied to a very specific set of conditions that I don't really see it. I see it remaining as kind of a subcultural interest in the same way Vaporwave, even after its meme status had kind of faded, or the same way that Synthwave, even after, essentially having the house brought down on it by the synth pop albums that, the elements of synth pop rather, that an artist like The Weeknd has brought into his work, like with Blinding Lights. Like, that's still around. But like, we're running out of things to be nostalgic for. So it's like there has to be a push for kind of singular visions and singular authentic visions that may synergize elements of these, elements of these various personal nostalgias as well as their own interest in various aesthetics. But yeah, it's like we're running out of things. We're running out of member berries. We're running out of member berries. The reserves are low.
So I think as the member berries are running low with almost everything, I think that does tie into the fact that everything is getting so samey. The algorithms have largely reduced things down to certain optimal styles and methods. And so you get your short form, your 30 to 90-second video feeds. There's certain people that are looking for that kind of dopamine. And then you have the intermediate videos of 10 to 15 minutes that YouTube has, been so well known for the past decade or so. And occasionally you'll get things outside of that. But by and large, the algorithm is optimizing itself around a certain set of ideas, and or at least I don't know if they're ideas or if they are just parameters that have been set. And I think that one of the realizations I've had, and I'm curious if you agree with this, is the saying that the medium is the message. Well, I think increasingly that these platforms are dictating what is the medium to a degree that was not quite so flexible before with, okay, well, is it print or, more curled up with a cozy book versus watching on a big screen? Those are big differences. But I think that the platforms are now fine-tuning the mediums to convey certain messaging, whether it be the schizophrenic almost short video stream of consciousness that you get on TikTok, where it's one thing after the other, versus the longer, more in-depth, still movie experiences that you get out of streaming platforms, but they're no longer in theaters anymore. Do you feel like that this is a continuation of that refinement? Do you think it's intentional, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would say I would say definitely we're reaching a point where the platforms are dictating what works and what doesn't within the pure metrics. Because I remember it was a few years ago that YouTube began focusing on watch time and retention above all else. People actually sticking around for the entire video, obviously with the underlying interest of keeping you on the platform more, which means more ads are served, which means we make more money, etc. which is part of the reason why you do see a lot of the more longer form video essays actually being pushed,
Hmm.
because, longer video, people will sometimes chuck it into the background, you know, uh, like people, the same way people like kind of listen to podcasts in the background in many respects. And in many cases, that's actually what's also getting that, big push in the algorithm are nice long form podcasts. I mean, you look at you look at the success of a guy like Joe Rogan, and that's like 2 to 3 hours of your ass being here on YouTube,
Hmm.
not for nothing. Uh, so I think we are getting to that point, and I do think streaming services are also in a very interesting place too, because in some cases you do have services that are actually very pro what they're focused on. Like I think a lot of people will point to something like a Shudder as being a really big love letter to like horror in many
Yes.
respects, and actually really shooting for some really innovative kind of horror films, as opposed to someone who just wants the latest Blumhouse shocker or what
Hmm.
have you. um, but I definitely I do feel like we're getting to this point where the kind of platform you're on does begin to dictate what it is you make. But in the same point, that's what makes music even that's I think that's actually what puts something like like music in a very bizarre catch 22 place, because you can literally do any genre, any style, anything you damn well like. But at the same time, if you're here to try and get plays and you're trying to get saves and you're trying to get sales, there is that push to try and, debase yourself and get yourself on a hot playlist, get yourself
Yeah.
into this ecosystem of, we were talking about lowest common denominators. That is what tends to happen. You get these, we need the hook right at the outset. We need to nail them right at the beginning. And then,
Hmm.
we have to have this nice, have something that's nice and pleasant, doesn't, take up, it doesn't draw too much attention to itself, but it's still memorable. It'll still play nice. I know people have done videos about like the playlistification
Yes.
of kind of music. I know Venus Theory, who, if I'm not mistaken, actually did the music for Avowed recently. So that's kind of an interesting bit of synergy there. But
Hmm.
Venus Theory has done videos on kind of the rat race of online music promotion and playlists, and how like there are certain, I think it's not Submission Grinder. Submission Grinder is for writing, but there's this service where basically you submit your song to potential playlist curators, but you'll get rejected for the most esoteric and tiny things.
Hmm.
That'll keep you from getting on the playlist.
I also think that the interesting thing about music there is that this playlistification of things has kind of moved itself into a area of influencers rather than the platforms. So
100%.
that is something that I think it's not ideal for music, but I do think it has something going there, because I don't know if you have subjected yourself to Spotify, but Spotify and their terrible shuffle button, where they will auto add songs to your playlist. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but it is hilarious how much pushback there is, because they have been trying for years now to figure out a way to basically keep bloating your playlists with new music that they think is going to match. But they are on point about 10% of the time, I would say, with what you actually want to hear. And the rest of the time, you're just like, oh, what is this? How did this get in here? And it's like, damn it, Spotify, I don't want your stupid smart shuffle, feature.
I haven't tried it personally, but what I have seen happen is the recommendations list for expanding your playlist.
Hmm.
They will go on freaking obsessive compulsive Like they will get the most specific fixations. Like here's my great example. For those who are wondering what this weird wolf dude is and who aren't regular followers of Richard or myself's work, I'm the creator of a pulp sci-fi series, 365 Infantry, and it's very much inspired by a lot of classic heavy metal and hard rock. And so by extension, I actually made public my main work playlist, which isn't my writing playlist, but rather the music that I take to kind of inspire me. And it's a big playlist. It is like we're kissing 4,000 songs on it. And because it's gotten so big, I am basically in this never-ending game of chicken with the Spotify recommendation algorithm. Because what they will often do is they will not stop until I have the entire Ozzy Osbourne catalog in my fucking playlist. They will because I no disrespect to Ozzy. I love him in Sabbath. I love a lot of his early solo work. Anything he did with Lemmy was fantastic. Hellraiser, the songs Lemmy co-wrote on the No More Tears album. Yeah, I believe that is because he helped co-write Mama I'm Coming Home. Great song off of, I believe, Osmosis. I'll See You on the Other Side was co-written by Lemmy too. So no disrespect. I love Ozzy's music, but Spotify wants Ozzy. They want to have him hook,
They
line,
really
and
like
sinker.
Ozzy.
And so every time I go down there, more often than not, it'll be some fucking Ozzy Osbourne song that they're trying to get me onto my playlist. And not for nothing. At least it's on brand. You know, I'll give them that. It's on brand. But at the same time, the array of songs I've curated has been so wide and disparate because there are elements of electronic groups. There are, a lot of the classic metal bands, your Motorheads, your Judas Priests, your Wasps, etc. But because I don't have enough Ozzy on it, I just keep getting fucking Ozzy every fucking time. Sometimes I'll get like a recommendation for a great new wave of British heavy metal band, Diamond Head. If you don't listen to fucking Diamond Head, go listen to Diamond Head. But like most of the time, it's Ozzy. And then it's like, Jesus, God, man, please, just enough. I got enough Ozzy in the goddamn playlist already. And that's almost always what they recommend. Just when I've exhausted them too, because I'm not joking when I say I call it a game of chicken, where it's like, all right, everything's on the fucking playlist. What you gonna do now? And for like weeks, there will be no recommendations on the Mega Mix playlist. Spotify is like fried by what I've done with this playlist. Not on other playlists, mind you, because I have other smaller playlists. And like, because I have like 2 Daft Punk songs, or like, I have on my most recent like contemporary music playlist, because I've been trying to like listen to more modern stuff, not even because of like the FOMO or anything, but just to be like, I want to experience different music. I want to get out of my head, out of my palette, and I want to just play around. Because I have like one of the songs The Weeknd did with Daft Punk, and I also have Get Lucky on that playlist, there's just this giant wall of fucking Daft Punk they want on that playlist. And I'm like, no, I don't need all this fucking Daft Punk. They're a great band. I love them. I'm sorry they broke up, but I don't need all that fucking Daft Punk.
Yeah, there's always like a thread that sort of maybe kind of makes sense for the addition, but it's always missing the point. Not always, but it's usually missing the point.
And not for nothing, a good chunk of the time they aren't too bad. Like a great example is that some of my playlists I'll actually pull on their recommendations to put into the main playlist. Like for this part of the 365 series, The Hunt. I kind of focus on more of an atmospheric AOR kind of sound. So a lot of like reverb, heavy synths and stuff. And not for nothing, they came out with a lot of really nice songs from that playlist, like Break It Up by Foreigner, which isn't really the reverb side, but has that great atmosphere and that kind of neoclassical affect to it, to genuinely one of my new favorite Heart songs, There's the Girl. Oh my God. That's a catchy one. So it's like, not for nothing, they aren't always bad. And sometimes, like, if they, I'll put it this way, I would probably say their radios are more egregious than anything they could do to my playlist, just because I've heard, all these basically this kind of mundanity factory that the radios become, where it's just you want the biggest. We were going back to largest common denominator. They want to go for just the biggest hits. Occasionally, you'll get a few smatterings of like deep cuts here and there, but it almost becomes not pay to play. But if you're a veteran of the industry or a beneficiary of the old infrastructure, your music is almost always prioritized over the independent artist beyond
Yes.
like a breakout success or something like that.
Mhm.
So I could definitely see it in the playlist, but I'd almost say probably Spotify Radio might be the more egregious of the two in that respect.
Well, I think that in general, there's always advantage that existing players have within any space. I think that that's definitely true whenever you have algorithms like Spotify's that are pushing things. But the trick that also sometimes comes around is if you are trying to use an established like an established profile as a creator, then you do have expectations that are of you. Now, you always have the option of simply going completely new, starting over, and whatnot that indies, like newcomers don't have. So that's good. But I think that the algorithm can also punish groups that might want to try and evolve their sound over time. I think of people like Red Hot Chili Peppers that have gone from sort of one end of the spectrum to the other with the long variety of albums that they've pushed out. Now, obviously they're an exception, I would say, to the rule of things, but I think that the algorithm can sometimes punish people for straying outside of their I don't initially want to say ghetto, but you know what I mean, outside of their pigeonhole that it has for them.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And it's like, I mean, you saw this going all the way throughout, the history of like modern music, like how there's always that threat of like a prog rock band, quote unquote, selling out because going from big sprawling 8 to 9 minute epics to trying, the record company breathing down their neck saying, give us a fucking hit already.
Yeah.
So it's like there are elements there too, but I think what makes it more insidious, I guess, is the fact that it is such a faceless problem. It's not, yes, we can all say the zoot suits are coming, basically. But at the end of the day, it is because this is all happening automatically. This is all happening based on profiles of what the music is, the contents of the music itself.
Well,
Like
hypothetically,
people,
it's happening organically, which
yeah,
it's not, but there
yeah,
is
but
certainly an organic element to it.
yeah, especially when you go back to things that were fueling, like, for here's a blast from the past. For those who use or still use Pandora Radio, the Music Genome Project is a good example of this, where it tries to catalog music based on this giant list of various things, where it's not just genre, it is instrumentation, it is key, it is tempo, it is the descriptive, like adjectives you would ascribe, you would assign to the song, and how all these different elements kind of come together to describe this type of track, which then gets you to other types of tracks. I actually think Pandora, if anyone ever wanted to just experiment with this idea of the algorithm, obviously Spotify is one of the biggest players in streaming, but if you ever want like a nice closed off loop of this, you could try something out with, Pandora and see what training a station is like to
I
get what
remember
you
doing
want.
that back pre-Spotify days. I remember that, and it's interesting that you put that up because that seems like a much more organic recommendation process that was much better at it. So maybe they have some better way of looking at things. So I guess we also wanted to, in that nature, make a few, forward thinking, looking forward ideas about where we think things are headed, what we think might be coming down the pipe. Do you think that, we can pan into other things here afterwards, but do you think that there's any changes that are overdue or that are coming down the pipe for music whenever it comes to are we going to finally, has Spotify kind of lived out its heyday, or is it kind of solidified itself into more of a YouTube status where it's going to just be there?
I think it will go one of two ways. If the Pied Piper finally comes calling, they might have to pay out their nose the royalty rate situation, because I think that's the other thing people forget is that you are paid like bupkis on Spotify's royalty system. It is absolutely just impoverished. And it's one thing when you're dealing with that in the context of like music estates. Like it's the one thing where it's like, oh yeah, the Michael Jackson estate has, all Michael Jackson's albums up there. So naturally, they're not too fussed about the royalty rate situation. But being an artist starting up, you have to get like insanely viral to even make $100. Yeah, exactly. Like I joked about that in that article where I said, hey, I probably counted for at least 100 streams of that Foster the People song. That's a whole 34 cents. It's terrible. It's fucking terrible. So if they wind up having to get those royalty rates, if they have to start pumping up those royalty rates, one, you might see a further rise in subscription price, which may finally break the bank for a lot of people in the same way they're being broken on Netflix. But also, just generally speaking, I think the idea of an institution that convenient, in the same way YouTube is, it is hard to get rid of that entirely. And there are people who will just keep paying because it is so ingrained in their workflow and in their life. Like I'm not crazy about having to pay, I think, was it $12 a month now?
Yeah.
But if I ever see 15 in my lifetime and I'm not, and I'm like, even if I'm rolling in the green, even if I am a, Fiddler on the Roof, if I were a wealthy man, even if I was, honey, I ain't paying $15 for this shit. I'll go back to buying fucking records. Like the people, I think a lot of people will reach their line in the sand if this price hike thing. Actually, I remember hearing, this is going to be interesting, and kind of wish we had talked more about it, but this will be food for thought. There's a video discussing actually people trying, record companies wanting, or rather a partnership between, I think, Spotify and Universal Music Group, developing essentially this super premium version of the service where basically you actually get like access to the artists as well as like the highest possible audio quality imaginable, which it's like, my God, people can barely tell the difference between 1080p and 4K when it's on a TV screen halfway across the room. How the hell do you expect them to know the difference between like, lossless FLAC files and a 320 kilobytes per second MP3? Like, go with God. It's going to be the artist perks that'll take that if it goes anywhere. But like, they're running out of things to offer. I guess that's the other thing to look at, is that they're running out of things to offer beyond just, becoming iTunes and just offering straight up purchasability of albums, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that if you get kind of like that lower cost freemium, you can lock in people for almost indefinitely, as long as you don't become too painful, to
Right.
use. But yeah, if I had the money, I would 100% just buy media and then have somebody, go hire an underling. Please manage my media server.
Library.
Yeah, please
Yeah,
please go get this
exactly.
on my media server, and then make sure it's connected properly so that I can stream it from any device anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know that costs a lot of money, but I don't care. I'd rather
Yeah.
own my media. But I think
Yeah.
that
Because I think, because the other thing, well, just one thing I'd also want to say is that I think that's really the only place where you're going to see much change, because one of the points when I was writing that article about, pop versus popular music, is the fact that because kind of the monoculture has been fractured by not just the atomization of the internet, but also because, people getting divided along all sorts of absurd identitarian lines for like a good decade plus.
hmm
You could go back even further if you wanted to, but for the most part, let's just say the 2010s were the decade of atomization
yeah,
through the socio-political as well as the technological. Because of those divides, it's like, really, I don't see there being kind of this moment of everyone uniting around a song in the same way some people used to. Like, I think the last time
there's not gonna be a Coke commercial with whatever that one song
yeah,
was.
the only thing I can think of, like a recent memory, that everyone was kind of united on, and I mean genuinely united on, was I'd say Blinding Lights by The Weekend. And it's also funny the timing of that, because that came out just when, the pandemic came around.
hmm
But even then, it still enjoyed this astronomical level of popularity. And, it's kind of turned into, I believe The Weekend actually has a trilogy of albums that came out, starting with After Hours. And I think the most recent of them came out just recently. I think tail end of January. Need
Really?
to sit down and listen to all. Yeah, I need to sit down and listen to all three in a row, because I know it's. I can't remember the. Oh, I think I remember it now. It's After Hours, then Dawn FM, then Hurry Up Tomorrow. Those are the three. So I definitely need to sit down and just go end to end to end with them. But yeah, that was the last time I ever felt like there was this kind of groundswell around it. Because even something like, because another example I actually gave was the fact that a lot of people, and this was something that I was kind of shocked by, because I'd known about him, for a while, but that a lot of people didn't know who the fuck Kendrick was. A lot of people did not know who Kendrick Lamar was when he did the Super Bowl halftime show this year. And it's like it sounds petty, it sounds silly, but it's no, genuinely, there's just a, for all his success, we're talking 22-time Grammy winner, freaking, Pulitzer Prize winning, major rap artist. And there's a bunch of people that are just being introduced to him now through the Super Bowl, which also
hmm
makes me think, okay, so if Not Like Us got as popular as it did, does that mean Not Like Us got as popular as it did online, and then kind of slowly seeped back through like the radio system and everything?
I think that is exactly what happened, because I've honestly know so little about like Kendrick Lamar or Drake or any of this whatever it is that's going on, with some of these things. It's I just think that the pipelines have changed completely, and we haven't quite figured out what the new routing of things is. But I think that just in general, this is bold prediction, I know, but in general, everything is going to start being much more. It's going to tend much more strongly towards the small, like real world, online, real world again. Like we're going
Yeah,
to
I can see that.
be kind of like this relationships and things like that, communities, maybe they're online, maybe they're in person, but I think to really get certainly something like music, you sort of need a degree of in-person experience and popularity, and you need to have some, good concerts, some good experiences, some good
You need a friend there to pass the aux to you.
yeah,
Like you need a
exactly. And
friend
you
there to
need to
actually,
kind of
yeah.
coalesce that community in a very strong way. Now, maybe you could do that online, but I think for it to really shine, it's kind of the build community offline to some degree, or at least social proof in person, and then social proof online, and then
Yeah.
that gets so big that suddenly the mainstream has to take notice of it. So
Yeah, I think that kind of localism is what's going to kind of push a lot of people. Is going to push certain trends. I think in the future is you're going to have that kind of. Yes, you have everyone going crazy about it online because there's this level of like there's this vanguard that gets everything day one drop. Oh my god, new song by this person. Let's do a listen and react.
mhm.
But then slowly it seeps out into, okay, this is what's now in the clear channel system. This is what's going out to all the radio
Yeah.
stations. This is what's happening. This is what's being dropped in the Chevy commercials. And of course, then there's just kind of people, your friend, coworkers being like, hey, have you heard this new song? Or, you have your friend group that you're like, whether you're just fucking chilling at their house, gaming for a bit, whether, I don't know, everyone starts like a tabletop session or whatever, and it's just kind of you're meeting up with people more, and you're exchanging the music you're listening to more and more. I think that might be a driver for that in the future, and it's probably
Mhm.
already is if we're all being honest, because I think it's just we haven't really had to think about culture in this way until pretty recently. So
Yes.
I think that
Yes.
might also be the thing. It's just that what's happening is less, oh, we need to start doing these things more, so much as, oh, so this is why X got popular versus Y. There's
Yeah.
there's there are grassroots elements at play.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that you can reverse engineer that. But another prediction tying things in here. I think that, and if you'll drop the link, you sent across a video that was talking about the media ecosystem and how you'll have basically people making content off of other people who are, making bad content, or the complaining backwash system, and we can talk more about that in another episode. But one of the comments that they made was that there's the critic culture that goes out there and reacts to certain things being useful as a marketing tool, for some of these mainstream properties that have things that they know are going to get a reaction out of this, that, or the other.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that we'll talk about predictions. One of my predictions is I think that the new Starship Troopers movie that they're going to be remaking, I think that is going to be just if it comes out within the next, I would say, 12 to 18 months, I think that is going to be the most, like, just dead on arrival thing imaginable, and that the only thing it's going to do is generate more attention. I think the original movie, and especially the original book, are going to get more play, more reads, more attention than whatever this new abomination is that comes out. Because I just don't think that the oh, we're so upset about things, and look how they are being upset by our thing, back and forth. I don't think that pipeline is functioning anymore, at least not to the
No,
same
I
degree that it was.
I agree 100%, and that might actually be, in my opinion, the best thing to end on. Let me just kind of elaborate my side. But first off, the video, for those who want to know, and we'll put links in the description, is I Am Begging You to Stop Caring by, I love this guy's name, DJ Peach Cobbler. You, sir, win the internet for today. But basically, his entire video is talking about how all of these various, everything from like the Tate brothers to
Oh yeah, that's who it was.
racial stunt casting, kind of like oh, we're doing Cleopatra, but now she's black or whatever. Basically, all of these are being done. All of the things that are being said, all the actions being taken, are meant to troll and get a reaction and get a rise, which then keeps people basically relevant. It is the only way to keep people relevant. I think the outrage cycle has been bled dry. Like you see recently, Captain America Brave New World came out, and it's just kind of nothing's coming out of it. It's like nothing. There is
A
no.
chunk of a plane crashed through the roof of a theater, landing directly in the middle of it, and no one was injured because there were two people in the theater, and they were presumably.
And I
sitting at
mean,
the
one,
back.
thank God, literally, thank God, no one's hurt. But also, that just kind of says it all. But not
they're
not even
doing
just
everyone
that.
a service by making sure that theater was empty.
I love it. But not even just that, but also just the simple fact that people are. There's so little to be upset about at this point because it's not like we don't know what's being done in, this way. And I'm not talking about in like, we're going into Bohemian Grove, boys. We're not talking about that. I'm talking about the very rudimentary fact that was a film with an incredibly messy shoot that is based off of an iteration of a character whose most prominent roles came in streaming series.
Yeah.
Like let's, not just that, but also the simple fact that when people are watching these, there's like, even people are now asking, okay, so what am I supposed to be outraged about? It's just, it's just a movie. It's just another, bargain. Well, I wouldn't say bargain bin because of the price they put on these things nowadays, but it's just, it's there. There's nothing left to be upset about. There's nothing left to be like, I think the only thing that came out of that was maybe I think the lead actor said something silly about how Captain America doesn't actually represent America and he had to walk that back.
And that was.
But here's the other thing. That controversy
based.
lasted like and here's the other thing too. The controversy lasted like 5 freaking seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It's like literally there was like nothing. It's not even like a nothing burger thing. It's just non-existent. If it breaks even, hallelujah. But if it doesn't, oh well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just, I guess we were gonna roll this show to a stop. It would just to say that I think we are going to see the end of this whole paradigm of pop culture outrage, because it's like we all know what the fundamental problems are. It's not just the lack of quality. It's not just the socio-political interests, whether you want to talk about it in terms of like, ESG funding, or if you just want to talk about it in the most basic terms of it just gets put into these films in the most terrible ways. We're at a point where it's like there's nothing left to be said. There's nothing left to be pointed out. There's nothing. Anyone who isn't aware of these things, basically it's a combination of either an apathy or complete ignorance, in the sense that they're literally not even showing up to these. Like, not an ignorance as in like, oh, they don't know. It's they don't care that they don't know. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. And that probably will be what happens to that Starship Troopers adaptation. And I mean, the glass.
I think that there'll be the requisites. There'll be the 20 requisite 10-minute YouTube videos talking about exactly how stupid the various things they're doing are. And I mean, some people get real mad about people making those videos, but they get views and it's fine. But it's just going to be, it'll be like the nightly news tonight at 10. They've cast Zendaya as Dizzy, and it's okay, we're all upset. And
I'm supposed to be mad about this casting choice.
and
So I should.
it's objectively
It's like
terrible,
the
but I
2
really don't
minutes hate
care.
from 1984 after a certain point. You know, it really does feel like that, where it's like, yep, put Goldstein up on the telescreen. Everyone starts screaming and shaking their fists, calling him a traitor and everything. The man could be dead in Guantanamo Bay, but we're supposed to be angry at him and pretend he's alive. That's what it really does feel like, and I think that is what I think that outrage era just. It's not only that it has to come to an end. I just think it's going to naturally come to an end because we have seen all the major franchises of the past half century get defrocked, get debased, but after a while, it's like we still have the great elements, you know. Just because Disney made a crappy Star Wars trilogy and this litany of, terrible streaming series and occasionally one good one and one good spin-off film doesn't change the fact that we still have the original trilogy. Doesn't change the fact that we still have its various inspirations from the works of Akira Kurosawa to Edgar Rice Burroughs to, so on. It doesn't change that we still have the access to the ingredients that made the original so wonderful and so beautiful and so incredibly invigorating, that it's like there has to reach a certain point where it's like we can build again, but also we can do something in our own way. We can find our own voice. We can create our own, stories or adapt the stories that happen. And no one's done Fritz Leiber's Fafner and the Grey Mouser. There are lots of stories that have yet to be told. For Christ's sakes, I'd love someone to at least do another shot at John Carter after Disney completely fumbled that ball. And we're getting that with this new audio series that the Burroughs estate is putting together with, I believe, Pocket Universe. I can't wait to hear that come together. So it's like, we're at a point where it's like, you can only be outraged for so long before you're like, okay, now something has to actually be done about this. We can't just stay mad forever. This isn't a real war. Like, this is the other thing too. And I think this might be this. I want the hammer blow to be this one. The culture war is kind of hard to fight because it's not a war of tangibles. There's no front line to go storming over. There's no man's land to go over the top into. It is fundamentally a frustration with the failures of the infrastructure that we have arrayed around so many of these classic series and franchises and properties, that it's like, if they're not going to get their freaking acts together and there's no way to wrestle these, you can't vote these people out of office unless you're a shareholder in the company. You can't, there is no, the only action the layman can take is to just say no to it, move on with their lives, and focus on something else. And I think that is what's going to happen. I think that is basically the culture war will be won with apathy and with redirected energy towards more original work, towards the few things of the mainstream that do hold potential promise. Like, I know some people are trying to make a big, to do out of James Gunn's Superman. For all I know, it might come out swinging. And I hope it does, because I'm at a point where I can't wish for failure anymore. Like, I cannot hold. I am not I've run out of hatred. It's like the old line from Kurosawa's Akira. It's like, I can't hate anyone. I just don't have that time. Yeah. And in the story's case, it's because the lead character is suffering from stomach cancer and his time's limited on Earth. And just in my case, it's just, I don't have the bandwidth anymore. I can't pretend to be angry about, oh no, what did they do in Alex Kurtzman's latest Star Trek series? Oh God. And then I just have my box set of like Star Trek, the original series. I got the original, the first 10 films of the series in a box set. It's like, what? I don't have any, I cannot give a care anymore. Yeah. I tried to. I got over The Last Jedi. Everyone's following my suit now.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of fun to hate, you know what I mean? It's kind of fun to be angry for a bit, but you either need to find some new form of anger to really keep feeding that, or you've got to find some other emotion to indulge in for a bit. So I do think that we'll see more actual enjoyment coming out of things over time. Eventually, we'll learn to love again.
I was about to say.
and then we'll be, after that, after we get bored with being happy, we can be angry again. But we got to start the cycle anew.